Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yochai. Today is the 18th day of the month of ER 5780, 12th of May 2020. It's the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer, which means it's Lag BaOmer. Has been since yesterday evening. Lag BaOmer. We'll be talking about that in a moment. This coming Shabbat, double portion, which concludes the book of Leviticus, bahar-בחקותי. The last two readings in the book of Leviticus. You may have noticed that we've had a lot of double portions recently. Here's the story. When there is a leap year, or when there's an extended year, when there's in Hebrew it's a Shana Muberet, there's an extra month of Adar, then all these double portions are single portions. But when we don't have 13 months, but only 12 months, these single portions become double portions because there's 4 less weeks in a year. So in order to keep the schedule of the weekly readings, they become double. And it just so happens that most of the ones that do become doubled are in this book of Leviticus. So, this coming Shabbat, Bahar, Mount Sinai is referring to, and בחקותי, in my ordinances you shall walk. The final two portions. Let's just speak a few minutes about Lag BaOmer, but before that, to make a very sad announcement. IDF soldier was killed last night in the Arab town of Jenin, in the Palestinian Authority Arab town of Jenin. Soldiers were making arrests, and soldier Amit Ben Yigal, of blessed memory, a terrorist, dropped, they're calling it a rock, probably a cinder block or something like that, off a multi-story rooftop, and despite the fact that the soldier was wearing a helmet, he was killed by that. And now, of course, there's a manhunt for the perpetrator, for the murderer. And it's the first IDF soldier killed in the year 2020. And many people who never met him went to his funeral today and to honor him and his family. Amit Ben Yigal, Zichrono Livracha. Today has been, and will still be, it's a little bit late in the day when I'm recording today because all sorts of technical difficulties on my computer. I'm still at home. And probably it will be the last Temple Talk I'm recording from home. And most likely next week I'll be back recording in the studio in Jerusalem. Israel has pretty much opened up most things by now. Not everything. There's still some of the trains aren't open yet, and restaurants aren't open yet. Hotels have opened, but things are opening, and most people who still have jobs, of course, a lot of people lost their jobs. Most people who still have jobs are back working on location. Again, I'm just laying back a bit because I can, and I've been checking the numbers each day. They're expecting a rise again in the people who have the corona once things get opened up. Amazingly, the numbers keep going down, even though things began to open up over 2 weeks ago, and certainly in the past 10 days, major opening up. Numbers keep going down. We've had double-digit numbers, low double-digit numbers of new infections each day, and I think there's about 5,000 people in Israel who currently are still sick with the corona. I think close to 12,000 have already recovered. And the fact of the matter is that doctors, not me, but doctors are calling it a miracle because they were not expecting numbers to be dropping so precipitously and so quickly and consistently. Of course, it's a miracle, that we're thankful for, and every day we thank God for this miracle, but we don't take it for granted, and there's still a chance that, God forbid, numbers will start to rise again. For the most part, people are keeping the rules of social distancing, wearing masks, although you see a lot of people walking around with a mask around their neck, which doesn't really do anybody any good. But for the most part, people are respecting the rules. But again, as things open up, and now synagogues are opening up, I think most services are being held outdoors because the weather is good. But people are getting back together, and weddings and things like that, up to a certain amount of guests are permitted. So we are grateful for the miracles that have accompanied us so far, and of course are praying that they continue, and we don't rely on miracles, but we try to keep to the rules and to the social distancing, and certainly we are tremendously grateful to the doctors and nurses and all the medical teams that have been working so dedicatedly in order to save lives. Just today, I believe today, a 22-year-old who was one of the younger people who had very, very serious bout with the corona and was I think it was intubated, in very, very serious condition for a number of weeks. He is out of the hospital now. So grateful for that. I'm thankful for the tremendous care that has been here in Israel. If you're hearing some noise, some background music, it's some late afternoon Lag BaOmer celebration. It's a truck that is driving down the street with some pre-recorded music. Anyway, Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer. Lag is actually Lamed Gimel, which is the numerical equivalent, Lamed being 30 and Gimel being 3, Lamed, numerical equivalent of 33. What's it all about? We've talked about it, I think, last week even, but let's go over it again. Lag BaOmer has a few reasons for its celebration. When exactly it began to be celebrated, we're not so certain. Its origins are somewhat shrouded in mystery, but certainly for nearly 1,000 years it has been mentioned in texts that go back that far. It is the anniversary of the death, the passing of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, a 2nd century Tana, who was a Torah scholar of that time, a student of Rabbi Akiva, and he is considered to be the father of Jewish Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, considered to be the author of the book of Zohar, which is the heart and soul of Kabbalistic study. And the story goes that he was a very, very sharp critic of Roman rule, talking 2nd century Common Era. And Rome, this was after the destruction of the temple, and Rome was in charge, and he was very outspoken in his criticism of Roman rule. And the Roman authorities decided it was time to shut him down. So hearing of this, he went on the run, him and his son Elazar, and they hid themselves in a cave here in Israel. And for 12 years they remained hidden in the cave. The story is that a carob tree grew in the cave, and a well opened up in the cave, providing them with food and water, and that's what they subsisted on for 12 years. Story goes on to say that they studied each day, all day, and that they even, in order to preserve their clothing, which they just had what was on their backs, they would actually strip down each day and bury themselves up to their waists, or maybe more, in the earth, and study. And during the course of those 12 years of study, the heavens opened up and revealed to him the supernal mysteries that he then began to teach, which is what we know as the teachings of the Zohar. And after 12 years, he and his son, hearing that the Romans were no longer after him, left the cave, and as they were walking for the first time, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai saw some farm workers plowing the field or harvesting, and he got very upset. He said, "What are they doing? They should be studying Torah. Don't they know that's all there is? That's any value in the world?" At which point, a bat kol, a heavenly voice, came directly from God and said, "Back to the cave, because you have much more to learn." And what he had to learn was that, A, not everybody can dedicate their entire days and nights to studying Torah. Not everybody is in a cave. And B, what the farmers, these good, God-fearing people, were doing was tending to God's land, which was a very, very respectable and required and beautiful commandment, mitzvah, to do. So after one more year, they got out. So in total, there were 13 years in the cave. And then he gathered around himself 10 students, one of them being his son, and began to teach the teachings of the mystical teachings, which were recorded and became the Zohar. And on the final day of his life, when he was revealing the final mystical secrets that he would reveal, he told his students that he wanted that his death, the day of his death, be celebrated each year. A celebration of his life's work, of the light of Torah, the Torah secrets that he brought into the world. And so that's what Lag BaOmer is all about. It's a celebration. And one of the things that traditionally we do on Lag BaOmer is light bonfires all over Israel and in diaspora communities as well, symbolic of the light of the Torah that he brought into the world, the mystical Torah, the Torah al pi sod. Sod meaning secret. It's the highest level of Torah understanding, of Torah knowledge. And this year, because of Corona, the site of his kever, of his grave, Har Meron, Mount Meron in the Galil, was closed to visitors. Usually, in recent years, the numbers have totaled 500,000 or more. People who go up for Lag BaOmer for the one day to his kever, to his grave on Har Meron, to celebrate. And this year it was closed off because of Corona, and bonfires were also discouraged and banned this year, which actually made for much clearer air and in some ways much more pleasant Lag BaOmer than some years. But despite the fact that these things, these public celebrations were shut down, it was still Lag BaOmer, and there was a lot to do, including study, lighting candles, and many other much quieter celebrations that took place throughout Israel. Now, there's a second reason given for Lag BaOmer being a special day, and that has to do with Rabbi Akiva, the teacher of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. And the story goes that 24,000 of his students died during this period, this 33-day period from the beginning of the Omer till now, from a plague. And the reason they say they died from a plague was because they were not treating one another with proper respect, not being nice to one another. And the punishment was this horrible plague which took the lives of 24,000 in fact, leaving Rabbi Akiva only with 5 living students, one of them being Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. And the plague ended miraculously on the 33rd day of the Omer. Now, there's another version to this story, which has garnered more and more followers, you could say, in recent years, and that is, it wasn't a plague. They were soldiers in Bar Kochba's army. Bar Kochba, as we know, led a revolt against Rome during this time, right? We're talking about the time of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, time of Rabbi Akiva. This was 132 CE, which when the revolt broke out, meaning it was exactly 62 years after the destruction of the Second Temple. And the stronghold of the revolt was in a town called Beitar, which is in today's Gush Etzion, south of Jerusalem. The area where Beitar was now is an Arab village called Batir. They took the name and Arabicized it, I guess, to Batir. But that's where the ancient city was, of Beitar. There's a modern town next to this site today called Beitar Elite, to be precise. Anyway, they staged the revolt, and Rabbi Akiva was a strong supporter of Bar Kochba. He considered him to be Moshiach, meaning, according to the definition of Moshiach that was very prevalent in those days, he was going to lead Israel to independence. He wasn't a mystical figure. He wasn't a great Torah scholar by any means. He couldn't perform any miraculous feats. He wasn't there to repair the souls of Israel. His stated goal was to drive the Romans out of the land of Israel and to reinstate his Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. And Rabbi Akiva signed on to that program and gave him his full support, and I imagine, and many imagine, that came with the enlistment of his students. Rome, because of many successes by the Bar Kochba revolution here in Israel, Rome was very plagued by the revolt, and were not succeeding in putting it down. And in fact, seems to be historical evidence that at some point during the 3 years that the revolt lasted, that they may have been able to even bring some offerings on the Temple Mount. That's how successful they were for a period of time. Rome was compelled to bring in legions from around their empire in order to ultimately quash the revolt, which they did with tremendous violence and brutality, killing hundreds of thousands of Jews in the land of Israel, and ultimately crushing the revolt and crushing Jewish hopes of any independence in the land of Israel for 2,000 years. And the crushing of the rebellion was so overwhelming and so disastrous for the Jewish community in the land of Israel that very likely the rabbis and leaders who survived in an attempt to really crush any latent hopes of sparking another rebellion basically turned away from political independence as being a goal, certainly a short-term goal, and certainly a goal to be achieved via an uprising. And so that may be why the version of a plague as being the culprit behind the death of 24,000 of Rabbi Akiva's students took hold, because they did not want to highlight the idea of an armed rebellion against the ruling power. So from that point on, the goal was accommodation to the powers that be, as opposed to rebellion and trying to overthrow those powers. So yes, for the next 2,000 years or so, a little bit less, Jewish communities in the land of Israel and, of course, in the diaspora were under the rule of whichever empire took over. So they laid low, and that's when the idea of more of a mystical type of return to sovereignty really began to take hold in the Jewish hearts and minds, and the idea of a strictly, you might say, secular political reestablishment of independence was not in the agenda, but a more full-fledged, total spiritual revolution, which we still await. And many of us today feel that we're in actually the early stages of having regained independence in Israel, having regained independence via secular ways, via basically the way of Bar Kochba. But now that we have independence, we are witnessing a tremendous spiritual revival and revolution. And again, this connects us back to the Zohar, back to the mystical revolution, let's say, that Shimon Bar Yochai started way back when. And the idea is that as the mystical knowledge becomes more revealed to the nation of Israel at large, to the general public, then that brings the ultimate redemption and the Messianic era closer and closer. And that, in fact, is what we're witnessing today, as the once very secretive mystical knowledge has become more and more the knowledge of the greater public here in Israel. So it's all going as planned, I guess. And here's the music, and I will be back in a moment with more of Temple Talk. Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. Today is 18th day of the month of ER, 5780, May 12th, 2020, 33rd day of the counting of the Omer, Lag BaOmer, and that means that there are 17 days left between today and Shavuot, the holiday festival of receiving Torah at Mount Sinai, and it happens at the numerical value of the word in Hebrew, Tov, meaning good, is 17. So between Lag BaOmer and Shavuot, what we have left is Tov. It's all getting better. God willing, all getting better, and we'll be ready to once again relive receiving Torah at Mount Sinai in another 17 days. This Shabbat, בהר-בחקותי, the double Torah reading that brings the book of Leviticus, this amazing book that we have been studying together, brings it to a close. I have to apologize. Right now, I know that the audio quality is not very good. I've tried my best on the computer equipment and programs that I have at home in order to present Temple Talk each week, and I've tried my best to improve the quality. I have a feeling it's just getting worse, which may be a sign that it's really time to get back to the studio. And again, as I said before, I hope that next week I will be recording in the studio. God willing, the the situation here will continue to improve, and I will venture out into my office and studio once again, and hopefully next Tuesday you'll be hearing a much higher quality recording. I can't promise, but I'm sure hoping for that. Okay, Leviticus. Leviticus has been nothing short of a revolution. You know, everything that was talked about and promised and hinted at and proposed in the book of Exodus between God and Israel is begun to take shape and take real form here in the book of Leviticus. You know, God said, I took you out of Egypt to be your God, and you're going to be my people. And you're going to serve me. You're not going to serve the Egyptians anymore. You're going to serve me. And at the beginning of Leviticus, we saw the inauguration of the tabernacle and the influx or the arrival, the realization of the immediacy of God's presence here in the tabernacle. And we have witnessed it, that presence and the holiness and the purity which it carries with it spread forth from the tabernacle, as has been described throughout the book of Leviticus. And as we get to the Torah reading of Bahar, we come to the realization of another manifestation of God's presence, what it means when God is really here with us on earth. We can begin with Leviticus 25:1. That's where Bahar begins. And it goes like this. And Hashem spoke to Moshe on Mount Sinai. On Mount Sinai, Bahar Sinai. That's where the Bahar comes from. And Hashem spoke to Moshe on Mount Sinai, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them, when you come to the land that I am giving you, the land shall rest a Shabbat, a Sabbath to Hashem. You may sow your field for 6 years, and for 6 years you may prune your vineyard, and gather its produce. But in the 7th year, the land shall have a complete rest, Shabbat to Hashem. You shall not sow your field, nor shall you prune your vineyard. Okay, the land of Israel is going to have a Shabbat, just like we have a Shabbat. We have a Shabbat every 7 days. The land of Israel will have a Shabbat, a rest day, every 7 years, meaning that agriculture will cease, meaning that we won't tend to our fields in that 7th year. They will lay fallow, and the produce of the field that grows, in spite of the fact that we're not tending to it, will be hefker, will be free for poor people, free for animals, but not for us, and certainly not as a commercial product. For 1 year, it is a Shemitah year, and that's the word Shemitah is translated as sabbatical. Okay, so what are we learning here? That this concept of holiness, this concept that God's presence fills everything, it doesn't just apply to mankind. It doesn't just apply to the animal world and plant world, which are brought as offerings in the tabernacle / holy temple, but it's going to ultimately apply to the land itself, the sacred land of Israel. And that land then gets a status that's parallel to our status, meaning the people of Israel, the land of Israel, and even the natural resources of Israel, as in the animals and the plants, and even salt, which is a constant part of the offerings. We're all partners. We're all partners in serving Hashem. We're partners in opening up our world to His presence, in tending to our world according to God's instructions so that His presence can fill our world. So it's a very different way of looking at things than we usually are. Land isn't simply a commodity. It isn't simply a resource. It isn't simply some place where we can make claim to and build on and exploit. No, it is a living, breathing, organic entity, not unlike ourselves, that needs to be not lived on, but lived with, and not exploited, but in partnership with. And that is the beautiful vision that we're reading about here in Parshat Bahar, in the closing chapters of Leviticus. So again, this change which has overcome the world, which began in the tabernacle, is now extending itself to the land of Israel. Now, of course, God is teaching this to Israel in the desert. So these are commandments that won't apply yet. So they didn't apply in the desert. They only apply in the land of Israel. So, first of all, it's an encouraging sign that they're getting ready to enter the land. Let's recall that they've been now more than a year in the desert, because that first year they built the tabernacle, and at the beginning of the second year, on the first day of Nisan, the beginning of the second year in the desert, was when they inaugurated the tabernacle, and they have been performing the offerings, and they've been receiving Torah, and there's nothing to hold them back. They're ready to enter the land. So actually, these laws, instructions concerning how to regard the land of Israel are very timely right now. And when we begin the book of Bamidbar, Numbers, next week, it's in the anticipation of, well, ototo, as we say in Hebrew. Very soon, Israel's going to be entering into the land. Of course, we will read about the disastrous debacle of the spies in the book of Numbers, which delayed Israel's entry into the land for 39 years, but that hasn't happened yet. So now, there's tremendous anticipation. They will be entering the land very soon. So these laws concerning the Shemitah, the sabbatical year, are very timely. But that's not all. Leviticus, Bahar takes it even further. In chapter 25, verse 8, "And you shall count for yourself 7 sabbatical years, 7 years, 7 times. And the days of these 7 sabbatical years shall amount to 49 years for you. You shall proclaim with the shofar blasts in the 7th month, on the 10th of the month, on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. You shall sound the shofar throughout your land. And you shall sanctify the 50th year and proclaim freedom throughout the land for all who live on it, freedom for all the slaves, indentured servants, anybody who was in debt and had to become an indentured servant in order to work off their debt. It shall be a jubilee year for you, and you shall return each man to his property, and you shall return each man to his family." Okay, this is 50 years. Everything goes back the way it was. You had property, you sold it. The property belongs to God. That's what it's teaching us. It all belongs to God. And yes, you have possession over it for a limited amount of time. And to remind you of how limited amount of time that is, we have the Jubilee year, in which land goes back to its original owner, to its original tribal ownership, and people are returned to their families, and properties returned to the people, and anyone, again, as I said before, indentured servants are liberated and go back home. This is Torah's statement of freedom, and ultimately it's a statement that everybody's equal, because nobody can accumulate untoward amounts of wealth, because every 50 years there's a balancing of the scales. Everything is is set back and we start over again. And the observance of the sabbatical years and the Jubilee years, the Yovel in Hebrew, is of utmost importance. And it's understood, and understood, implied very, very clearly in this week's Parsha that the observance of the Shemitah and the Yovel year is integral to our stay in the land of Israel. And if we dare to ignore all this, then we are in jeopardy of, God forbid, going into exile. Today in Israel, we keep the Shemitah years. There's a lot of workarounds in order to accommodate modern economy and needs. And these workarounds, each time we come to another Shemitah year, another 7-year cycle, there's a greater effort and a more knowledgeable and learned effort to more fully observe the sabbatical year as described and as envisioned by Torah. So it's not something that we've been able to simply dive into because farmers, they can't simply close shop completely for an entire year. So there are workarounds, but as I said, the ultimate goal is to reach a level where we can observe the sabbatical year in Israel as close as humanly possible to what is described in Torah. As far as the Jubilee year, there is still a question as to when that Jubilee year is, when it should be observed. So it hasn't been observed. But again, it is an issue that is growing in intention, and especially as the population here grows, the Jubilee year, there are certain commandments concerning the land of Israel that don't come into full effect until the majority of Jews in the world are living in the land of Israel, and that is, we're not quite there yet, but we are moving quickly in that direction. So the issue of the Jubilee year is becoming a very, very important and crucial issue to be worked out. In any case, it is an amazing concept, which again is a very humbling call to mankind. We're on the land, and we are given the freedom to work the land, to better ourselves, to improve our lot, to acquire things, to be homeowners and landowners and owners of possessions. But there is a reckoning every 50 years in which we have to step back and really, really internalize the fact that it all belongs to God. And when He took us out of Egypt, it was to take us, Israel, to His land. And, it belongs to Him. And that also teaches us this. There's a lot of guarantees with this, a lot of guarantees. For example, we continue to read. In verse 11, the 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. You shall not sow, nor shall you reap its aftergrowth, or pick its grapes that you had set aside for yourself. It is a jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You shall eat its produce from the field, and you shall not wrong one man his fellow Jew. And you shall fear your God, for I am Hashem, your God. You shall perform my statutes, keep my ordinances, and perform them, so that you will live in the land securely. V'shavtem ala haaretz levetach. Security. If we follow these commandments, we're secure. If we follow these commandments, our enemies will not bother us. Wow. Isn't that a wonderful idea? Isn't that a wonderful thought? Why don't we give it a try? Aren't we always looking for security? We have an army. We have a very good army. We have a very very strong sense of responsibility one toward another here in Israel. These are all things that are part of that security mechanism, but ultimately our security comes from God, and when God says, "You perform my statutes, keep my ordinances, so that you'll live in the land securely," that's a pretty strong message, and that's a pretty strong guarantee. It's not in heaven, it's here on earth. We just got to do our part. We continue in Leviticus up to verse 19, and the land will then yield its fruit, and you will eat to satiety, I'm not sure how you say it, and live upon it securely. Meaning, God guarantees that if we keep these shmitot, these sabbatical and jubilee years, and there'll be enough produce. We're going to say, wait a minute, the 49th year we don't work the land, and the 50th year we don't work the land. And the 51st year, starting the new cycle, we do work the land, but we don't have anything from the year before. So for 3 years, if we properly keep the sabbaticals and the jubilee, for 3 years, we have no fresh produce, no fresh grain to eat. And God guarantees us that there will be the harvest, the final harvest in the closing years of the Jubilee cycle will be so bountiful that we will have enough food to carry us through. So that is another lesson of complete faith, complete trust in Hashem. I mean, if you can say for 3 years we're not working the land, or for 2 years we're not working the land, and we're not going to have the benefit of working the land for 3 years, but God's going to provide for us, that is complete and utter faith in Hashem's word. And that's what God wants from us. He wants that relationship. He wants that closeness. He wants that nearness. He wants to know that we're in this together. As part of all this, we're instructed that we're not to take advantage of, the Jubilee rulings in order to, God forbid, take advantage of one another in terms of, monetarily, financially. That it's very detailed, explained in great detail how we are to work the Jubilee in terms of the economics of it, so that no one, God forbid, takes advantage of one another. And again, we're told in verse 38, I am Hashem your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, to give you the land of Canaan, to be a God to you. And, that's what it was all about from the start. We didn't leave Egypt. The plan wasn't that, thank you very much, now we're going to strike out in the world and see where our hearts take us and where we want to go with this. No, the plan from the very start was that God was taking us out of Egypt to put us in Canaan, the land of Israel, where we'd be serving God. And He's going to be right there with us in the Holy Temple. And that land is, again, our partner in serving God, in bringing God's presence into the world, and in being God conscious and aware of God's loving kindness every day of every year, every moment that we're in the land. And again, the quid pro quo is we keep the Torah and God keeps us. Now, I only have a few minutes left in the show. Before the book of Leviticus concludes, in the last portion of Bahar-בחקותי, we come to a section where we're told if we follow God's commandments, all is good, but if we don't, all is going to be not good, and horrible things are going to happen to us, and we'll go into exile, and there's a whole list of very horrible, horrible things that will befall the people of Israel, and we have experienced them in our long years of exile. And the heart of that is God says, if you treat me with Keri, I'll treat you with Keri. And Keri means happenstance. If you're careless, if you don't think there's any rhyme and reason in the world, if that's your take on reality, that's going to be my take. And I can treat you that way as well. And I can just let the world overrun you with carelessness. God forbid you don't follow my ways. But God promises that he'll never forget the covenant, even if we at times do, and he will bring us back to the land. And that brings us to the end of the show, and here we are back in the land, thank God, and all is good and getting better. Thank you for being with me, Temple Talk.